Joining us now, Anthony Conwright, writing in The Nation, Will Black Americans Vote for a Socialist? Anthony, welcome to the program. There's a new poll out today from Emerson, taken over, I think, just ending on Friday, with still 2 days of the early voting to take place, showing that Zohran Mamdani is within the margin of error in the first ballot, and at 35 to 38, I believe it was, and is 2 or 3 points up in the eighth ballot. It's ranked choice voting. But one thing has been clear, in both in this polling and in prior polling, that Andrew Cuomo's biggest base of support is with African-American voters. Also, I should say Asian voters and Latino voters, and in the boroughs of the Bronx and Staten Island, which you wouldn't necessarily assume would be voting with each other. Give us your sense of what is driving Cuomo's support in the Black community in New York.
Right. So just for starters, to acknowledge, obviously, talking about race can sometimes get a little weird and awkward, and talking about people as a monolith can be a little problematic. But let's continue forward knowing that everything we say and ask is with the best of intention. And so with that being said, let's talk about Black voters.
We're talking broad strokes. I mean, there's not all college-educated people are voting for Zohran Mamdani. Not all Jews are voting in one way or another. But this is when we talk about electoral politics. A lot of times, people get reduced down to one demographic if there's a consistency there. So, but with that said.
Right. So, okay, I think it's actually a part of sort of a larger project within establishment Democratic Party politics, in that if you can keep progressive leftist politicians away from Black folks, well, all we will tend to know are the establishment candidates. So one of the things that Zohran was experiencing early on was name recognition, right? And so that really is going to impact Black voters who tend to get their news from more establishment type programs. And then if you kind of think about Zohran's politics, we've been kind of trained to believe that anything that is democratic socialist is bad and is sort of anti-Black in a way. And unfortunately, those are all of the things that Black voters have to kind of combat in this race to sort of vote within their interests, But as soon as Black folks hear about Zohran and hear about his politics, they're on board. I was actually getting my hair cut last week on 116th and Malcolm X, and my barber was like, he knows I write, and so he was like, yo, man, what you think about this Zohran guy? I kind of like him. What is I'm 65 years old. And he goes, well, I don't want to, I can't really say anything out loud because, I'll be looked at like I'm crazy. And I was like, no, shout it from the corner. We have to expose folks in our community to ensure that, we're voting within our best interests.
How much of it is, we saw this in the context of Bernie Sanders in 2016 and particularly in 2020. And, with South Carolina voters, James Clyburn came out, endorsed Biden. Clyburn has done the same thing with Cuomo in this instance. How much of the dynamic is that Black people understand or have a sense of the stakes in an election? Within the context of a general election in the country, it seems to me the dynamic may be different than in New York City, but that there's a concern that was articulated about Bernie Sanders that he can't win. This was even a dynamic. This was even a dynamic with Obama early in 2000. I want to say through the summer of 2007. That he can't win and in a general election, and therefore we have to make sure that we're putting up the best candidate. Now, I don't see how that would necessarily apply in New York, where, although Rudy Giuliani is probably still in people's minds, how much of it is it that versus the idea of a democratic socialist being seen as a white project?
Okay, I think it's all interconnected. But when you actually like break down the reasoning, you can actually, if you're thinking something's more racist than the other, like imagine what it is like to tell a voting bloc, like you cannot have any sort of progressive or leftist political aspirations. You have to be pragmatic and you just have to sort of suffer slowly. And I think that's crazy. There's nothing pragmatic about poverty. There's nothing pragmatic about any sort of suffering. And we tend to only apply that type of thinking when it comes to black folks, like, you know, white people. If you look at Trump's voter base, they have allowed him to literally violate the Constitution. And no one was like, well, you know, he has to do so with some sort of pragmatism. He's been doing it full tilt. So I don't understand why all of a sudden when it comes to black people, it's like, oh, well, we are so pragmatic. We will take our suffering very, very slowly instead of having the audacity to have political aspirations that are outside the bounds of establishment party politics. And I think it's it's insane. I think that's more of a kind of like a narrative than it actually is like more so than it is about what black people need or should aspire to politically.
How much of this is a function of Barack Obama? Because, and I ask this because in 2012, I had the late Glenn Ford on from the Black Agenda report. And his argument to me at the time, which I think, has obviously stuck with me for 12 years, was that that Obama was the greater of two evils between him and Mitt Romney, in the sense that Obama was undermining the long historical role of radicalism and socialism within the black community, and was essentially short-circuiting it by being so pragmatic. And what's your sense of that?
Well, I think that's true to an extent. I don't think one man can sort of outdo like an unethical system. So no matter who you put in there, like no one person's going to topple sort of the aspirations of the empire. And I think one of the things that we all sort of did that was not fair to Barack Obama was sort of project our own hopes of what a black president would mean without sort of realizing that the last thing he could do as soon as he gets into office is actually sort of be a quote unquote black president, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So, he kind of in response to some of the stuff, but this is the thing with Obama, in response to what Trump was doing, he had somewhere said, imagine if I had did some of that. And it's like, well, I did imagine you do. Like you can. I wish you would have gone that far for the moral cause. And I think that's what's so frustrating to kind of look at sort of establishment Democratic Party politics, is that they've lost the ethical and moral calling to everything. It is a moral imperative to look at your neighbor, no matter what race they are, and say, you shouldn't die on the street. It's a moral imperative to say in the richest country in the world, people shouldn't be homeless. It's crazy. How can, in New York City, Cuomo is like doing the whole, well, if we raise taxes, then millionaires and billionaires, oh my God, we might lose a few. I don't know what we'll do without, one of the 123 billionaires that lists New York City as their primary home. And it's like, I don't care. I'm more concerned with protecting the moral imperative than the political one. And so fine, you might lose 10 billionaires, but you're losing hundreds and thousands of black people who are displaced because they can't afford to live here, and white people too. And so I think what's super frustrating with what's going on, especially to watch some of the older black statesmen is that they've completely lost the moral imperative that Zohran is fighting for and advocating for.
Let me read to you, if you would, because this really stuck with me. If New York became a socialist economy, everything is free, Cuomo said. We tax the rich at an exorbitant rate. The rich will move to Massachusetts. I remember when we used to call Massachusetts Taxachusetts. I didn't, but that was New Jersey or Florida. And then you write, to be clear, 123 billionaires list New York City as their primary residence, the most in the world. And New York City is home to 384,500 millionaires, the most in the world. Cuomo mourns the prospect of losing this class, but does not grieve for the exodus of black families, black children, and black teenagers forced out of New York City by the rising cost of living. I think that really, really puts things very well into perspective. What from your perspective? I mean, you had the opportunity to, talk directly to your barber, who, at 65 in particular, is in a cohort that generally is more skeptical of non-establishment Democratic politicians. What is needed to mobilize the black community? I mean, particularly in the context of a primary that's going to decide somebody that is more than likely. I mean, the Republican Party, Rudy Giuliani was last in Bloomberg. But that was almost 2 decades ago. Like, I mean, it seems like New York City is not going to vote for a Republican. Certainly not going to be Curtis Silwa or Sliwa. I can't remember how to say his name. But what is your sense that needs to happen in these communities to change their voting perspective?
Well, we have to broaden the sort of the people that we present in front of voters as sort of the I don't want to say like shepherds of black voters, but so like, for example, I am a super left black atheist. Like, there aren't a lot of folks like me that are put in front of black audiences. And I think that's like one of the things. So that way, like people, like black folks can see like, oh, it's actually not a white thing to say, wow, everybody in the country should have health care. And if we do think it's a white thing, we go like, that's probably like, that says something about how we think about black politics. But like, I think we kind of have to expand who folks are being exposed to. But also, I think just as a general rule of thumb is to remember to center ourselves in the moral imperative. I think like we really, really lost that. And part of that kind of happened once black folks became sort of enrolled in the Democratic Party politics, which happened after Martin Luther King Jr. died. And so in order to have political standing and to have like a seat at the table, there are some things that you kind of are forced to let go of that are sort of moral principles. And so I think part of that contributed to this, but I think at some point, not only black folks, but like as a community, as a whole, like on the Democratic side, we have to like, we have the moral argument. Like, no one should die on the street. Full stop. Nobody should be homeless if they do not have to be. Full stop. Like, and I think just having hold of that moral clarity and presenting that and keeping that at the center of the sort of politics, I think would be the best thing.
Do you think, and I'm just wondering, like, why Cuomo, what the appeal is? And I wonder if your sense is that in the black community in New York City, there is any amount of jadedness that your barber's asking this question about Zohran this week. We're closer to the election. I wonder if like a certain amount of, because in black folk that I spoke to in the wake of the first Trump election, people were like, I'm not that surprised. I'm, there's a certain level of jadedness that I wonder, and this obviously is just anecdotal, but I wonder if from your perspective, that jadedness causes engagement that might be a little bit later in the process. I mean, very few people know that the primary takes place. I mean, and I think this is going to help Mamdani, to be honest. But, were it not for Mamdani in this race, most people I know would have no idea that there was I feel like the last one barely anybody knew was even happening because people just don't pay attention to politics when it's 92 degrees out.
Right. And so here's the thing: if you look at Trump, especially that first, his first win, one of the things he's like, well, the system is rigged, the tax system is gamed. Look at this war. Look at all. So he's kind of taking a critique of America that Black people have had for such a long time, right, and then using it. And then you have Democrats being like, "What do you mean the system is rigged? No way." So he kind of made Democrats defend an unethical and system that is rigged, which appeals to white people because white people are poor too. So Democrats were like, instead of finding a way to build a multiracial coalition that says, hey, the system is rigged, they let Trump have all of that ground. And Black people are, obviously there was a small increase and whatnot with Black support for Trump. But I mean, what do you expect? If you're not, it's the best you can offer somebody is not Trump, or I'm with her, or this is such an existential crisis, but we're not going to actually have any sort of politics that addresses a moral concern. Well, what do you think is going to happen? And so I think if Democrats would have been like, you know what? Yeah, there is police brutality, and white people, you know what? The police beat you and shoot you too. So we all need to get together to fight this. You know what? Rent is super high in New York, and it's disproportionately impacting Black people. But you know what? There's a lot of poor white people in New York too. And you know what? The system is rigged against you. It's also rigged against me. So let's get together and fight this thing. And so I think if you keep presenting a situation to a group of voters where it feels like nothing is going to change no matter who you vote for, of course you're going to feel jaded and displaced and sad and despondent. That's just a natural occurrence. But then unfortunately, there aren't just a lot of Black people in the United States in general. And so we sort of disproportionately are impacted by those things. But if you don't give someone to hope for, if you don't give people something to aspire to, what do you think is going to happen? And so we have, Cuomo is going to Black churches being like, oh, well, be idealistic, but you have to be realistic. And I think that just is not a message that you see from the Conservative Party. They're not saying, well, we have to pragmatically use ICE to round people up. They're like, we'll get a few Mexicans here. We'll even get some white people. We'll just start picking people off the street without due process. Who cares? We're just going to do it until we get the desired results. And I think that's the kind of energy we have to have on the opposite side of the coin. I'm not necessarily, I don't care if there are a bunch of billionaires and millionaires who end up leaving the city. My sort of moral concern and ethical concern isn't with them. It's my concern is for the person who's sleeping on the street around the corner from my house. I don't want that person to be displaced. My concern is for people who can't afford to take the bus. My concern is for lowering police contact with people who are on the bus. And a good way to do that is if you have universal bus transportation. I just think if you present people with sort of a moral North Star and you say, I don't care what your race is, I don't care, wherever you are, rural, urban, in a city, like in the richest country in the world, we shouldn't have people who are dying on the street. Like, I just think it's that simple. And I think we just sort of, the party has to do a better job of making that the message, instead of have the audacity of a little bit of hope.
The irony, too, is that Cuomo talks about his concern about capital flight from New York State. In the meantime, he was lowering taxes on them.
Right,
so what's the point?
Right,
like, we just there's going to be some store on Madison Avenue that's going to close because people aren't buying, fur sinks anymore or whatever it is. Anthony Conwright, we will put a link to your piece in The Nation magazine. Much appreciated.
Oh, no, thank you for having me on again. Sorry for calling in so many times. I was that one caller that called like 2 weeks ago.
Appreciate it.
No problem.
Glad to connect.
Thank you.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.